show about sports by people who love sports. Welcome to Sports Isolated. Here's your host, Callum. G'day everyone, welcome to another episode of Sports Isolated. Joining us on the show today is CEO of Inclusive Sport SA, John Cranwell. John, how are you, mate? Nice to see you.
Yeah, hey mate, how are you? I'm quite good. Sitting at home in a caravan in the backyard, trying to work in an isolated world. So how we go.
I'm not too bad, mate. Obviously, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's obviously it'll be good to catch up. I haven't seen you for a couple of years after I did some work with the intellectual AFL programs that the Inclusive Sport was running.
Yeah, I think you were coaching Henley had a C7 team at the time, and they all moved on anyway, didn't they? The team and the players moved to another club.
Yeah, so I coached there 2016, 2017, was involved in the state team 2017, and then sort of, I suppose it came a bit more demanding of my time, and unfortunately had to step away due to some university commitments because I decided to do a double degree. How foolish.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it was obviously really hard because not a lot of the players were based in the Henley area, which was great for me. I lived around the corner, but a lot of them were based out at Salisbury or really far down south. So it became quite challenging for those players to get to training. But obviously, Nathan's made the competition really good, and obviously we're going to talk about those footy programs later in the show. So, John, Do you mind giving us an insight into your career in the sports industry and how you got your position at Inclusive Sport SA?
Yeah, definitely. Look, it probably starts towards the end of year 11 and 12 there. At high school, I was an avid skateboarder and listened to a lot of punk music, and I decided I wanted to run Vans Warped Tour for the rest of my life. So I decided to try and get a career in sort of event management and things like that. And after about it didn't take me long to realise, though, that the jobs in that industry weren't really about how much you knew. It was more about being at the right place at the right time and then living those sort of roles and always being on the move. And so I did the sport and recreation degree. I think it was called Recreation Sport Management back in the day with Uni SA. It's now a sport and business management maybe degree. I can't remember.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so I put my hand up to do that degree, and luckily the entry score dropped by 10 points that year for the TER, so I slipped in, which was good, and rocked up on the first day of uni and walked into the student union back when they still had student union offices, and had a job board, and there was an advert there for a recreation assistant for a group called SAS Rapid, which was what Inclusive Sport used to be known as. South Australian Sport and Recreation Association for people with integration difficulties. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, but I was looking at the job ad, and it was working with young kids living with intellectual disability, ASD, and a bunch of other stuff. And because I'd grown up around disability through my personal life, it was a very normal sort of idea for me and something I really gravitated to, and I was studying recreation, so I thought I'd put the two together. And as a 17-year-old, got a casual job as a recreation assistant with Inclusive Sport SA, and sort of finished off uni over the next sort of 3 or 4 years, and realised though that I was quite interested in the sport management side of things. Although I played a lot of sport, I was never really an elite athlete. I didn't really like training that hard. I didn't really like having to put my entire life into winning, and so I was just a guy that would fill a team and be capable enough to play, but never really dedicated my life to it. So I quite enjoyed the back office type stuff in sport. Yeah, and sort of finished off that degree and decided that I had no idea how to get a job, so I just basically run away from home and moved to Brisbane for 3 years almost, and just worked casually and enjoyed not sort of working in any real industry after 3 years, 4 years at uni and 12 years at school. So I moved back in 2007 and got a job with Bowls SA as their development manager, and finally got to put in all that I learned at uni into practice. Spent almost sort of 3 years there at Bowls SA and moved on for a couple of years to Squash SA, as a pathways manager. So not only doing development projects, but also managing their high performance programs and the junior state teams and the senior state teams, which was a really good opportunity as well. And after I was made redundant there when they had some changes to their corporate structure. And then I was working as a labourer, in fact, on the Seaford Rail extension at the time, just to fill in time. So no doubt you're having a bit of an understanding of what that's like, mate, when you you lose your role in sport. You try and look at just about anything you do to either stay connected or keep the money coming in. So I ended up just labouring down the road from my house, and I got an email from the people at SAS Rapid saying that the CEO was finishing up, and if I was interested, I can put my hand up and apply for the role. And I did. I'd always been passionate about this organisation, having worked for them and alongside them with bowls and squash, and put my hand up, put my best foot forward. And they took a gamble on a 29-year-old CEO at the time. And that was 8 years ago. So I've now been here. I've just clocked over my 8-year anniversary with Inclusive Sport SA as their CEO.
Yeah, obviously, sounds like you've done a lot of different things in your time. Obviously, the plan for most people after they finish uni is to go straight into, I suppose, a career in their chosen industry, I guess. And obviously, you had a bit of a windy road, but obviously you managed to get something that you love. And obviously, from my experiences at Inclusive Sport SA, it's always been a really great place to be involved with. And it's obviously very rewarding, I suppose, to make your community a better place, and giving those people an opportunity to play sport is something that they just absolutely love. John, can you tell us a little bit more about your responsibilities as CEO?
Oh, look, the perfect CEO is the one who can delegate all of their work to others and just lead them. So I remember sitting, I don't know if you were there that year. It might have been a couple of years before you joined the state team, but I was sitting at the MCG with a young guy called Toby Sutherland. And Toby and I had been hanging out for a couple of days, and Toby just sort of stares at me, looks to the side and stares at me, and I'm like, what? And he goes, I finally figured out what you do. And I'm like, what's that, Toby? And he looks at me and goes, you have a lot of coffee meetings and you delegate all your work to others. And I'm like, if that's not the best definition of a CEO in sport, I don't know what is. So, he was absolutely right. My actual on paper roles and responsibilities, though, is to lead the organisation towards its purpose. My sort of day-to-day work is bit of an intermediary between the board and where we need to be strategically, and then working with staff and stakeholders in terms of operational stuff. But it's really quite different and diverse. Some days I'll be non-stop in report writing and editing sort of anything from the annual reports and financial reports and everything else like that. Right through to not even being in the office one day because I've got 8 meetings with different people and different stakeholders around town. And it's quite fun. I enjoy that. My last 3 weeks, though, in this new isolation world has been different, not being able to go and do that part of my job. So I've still been catching up with people. It's just through Zoom and Skype and things like that at the moment. But I didn't realise probably how much of my role is really around that engagement with people. So making sure that, we're having regular enough meetings with the Office of Rec and Sport, with our state partners in sport. So, for footy, SNFL, Football Federation when we can, tennis, cricket, all sorts of things. So it's staying connected with the people in the industry that make the decisions. And then for Inclusive Sport SA, what we're really trying to achieve at the moment is moving away from the delivery of sport, which we were traditionally running for almost 40 years, more so now to an engagement organisation and advocacy group, and offering expertise and consulting advice on how to be inclusive. So to do that, it's about maintaining close contact with the industry, showing them the work and the expertise and the skills that we have to build their sport to be more inclusive. So it's a new world for us, and one that myself and the team are really enjoying at the moment.
Yeah. So, John, can you tell us a little bit more about the different interactions that you have with the state sporting bodies? Obviously, You have very close relationships with the SANFL through Nathan Pepper. Obviously, Saka's doing some really good work in the disability space with the teams that they send to Geelong as well. I know you've got some good relationships as well with Football SA, and obviously they run a really good futsal program as well. So do you mind telling us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, definitely. Look, historically for the 8 years, it had been my job for most of that to do all of that engagement. So making sure that we have regular conversations and meetings and ideas and planning, and in a sense, like sitting over a coffee table with a coffee and talking through some of the options and opportunities. In the last sort of 2 years, I've been able to bring in a general manager for that area of the business, a lady named Katrina Ramford, and Katrina's taken more of a leading role in that in the last couple of years. However, she and I team up quite well when we do all that sort of engagement. So to give you an example of some of the stuff that we've done over time and where like a general meeting might end up, Nathan and the SANFL is probably a really good example. So the SANFL and I, when I started, didn't have any interaction. There was no interaction between Inclusive Sport and the SANFL. All of our state footy programs were being run through the Amateur League. And we sort of caught up with a meeting, I think back in the day, with Peter Cates and Dave Hutton, and just had a chat and said, if you're running a state program for football, should you not also include intellectual disability in that? And, through a few years of chats and engagements, they were able to support the idea and the concept of having an SANFL state team. I then knocked on the door of the AFL House when I was in Melbourne for another event and had a meeting with a guy called Josh Vanderloo. And Josh is an ex-South Australian and had also been involved in the state team with SAS Rapid many years beforehand. And he was the one who was able to plant the seed within the AFL for having a national inclusion carnival where all the states could put in a team. And over a few years, that built from SA Victoria to every state and territory in the country having a team in there, which was pretty awesome. So what sort of eventuated out of all of that was the SNFL had a state program, but they didn't really have any touch points when it came to the development program, which is the Adelaide Footy League C7 division. And Nathan and I were having a chat with Adam Kelly at the SNFL, who was the general manager of football at the time and now at the Crows. And he sort of asked us, what, if anything, what could SANFL do to support intellectual disability football and disability in general? And we said to him, look, without a dedicated role focusing on that sort of work, you're going to find it hard to do. And at the time, they'd only dedicated a part-time role to disability, which was more than they'd ever done. But to us, it wasn't enough. And through just a discussion with the SANFL, we floated the idea of seconding Nathan to the SANFL for a year to build the program to the point where they may be able to invest in it full time. And those sort of discussions took almost a year, mate. And after a while, we were able to get the finer details sorted. And I think it would have been in 2008 maybe, or late 2017, 18, 17. We were actually able to get Nathan into a full-time role at the SANFL as a disability inclusion programs manager. And that went on for about 15 months. And in October last year, they offered him a full-time contract for that role. So what that meant, though, was football were in control of all football programs for disability for the first time in our almost 40-year history, which also meant we were able to transition out of delivery of that sport, which was very much in line with our purpose. So, these sort of things happen, like you have conversations, which leads to another conversation, which leads to some written proposals and programs. And after a long time, that turns into a financial transaction where the SNFL were able to pay us a portion of Nathan's wage, and we kept Nathan employed in a full-time role there. It met their needs, it met our needs, and turned into a new opportunity for both of us.
Yeah, obviously the plan would be for every sporting organisation to have their own, I suppose, person dedicated to inclusive sport. Obviously, with the smaller sporting organisations, probably a little bit challenging, but obviously, cricket, netball, and AFL and soccer as well have obviously been quite successful in that. But another program that Inclusive Sport SA run is the Rapid Swim program, which has obviously been very, very successful. And Nathan obviously had a lot to do with that during his time at Inclusive Sport. So can you tell us a little bit more about that one?
Yeah, so Rapid Swim is a program we've had for almost the entire time that SAS Rapid has been around. And what it was a learn to swim program for students that had, different needs or significant needs when it came to small group learning sessions. So if you've got kids, or if you've ever been to a swimming pool when swimming lessons on, quite often there's one swimming instructor and their job is to literally pick people up by the collar and try and keep them afloat. So, you've got 4 kids and you don't want any of them to drown.
I know that feeling quite well.
Yeah. And so the Learn to Swim program came about where a lot of kids with intellectual disability and who were on the autism spectrum and had ASD found it quite difficult to concentrate and understand the direction of the instructor, and would end up being quite a significant drain on that instructor's time and at the expense of the other kids in the class. So what Rapid Swim Learn to Swim created was an opportunity to build the capacity of people living with disability to engage in swimming mainstream. So they would come into the one-on-one swimming lessons that we provide. They would do that for anywhere from 6 months to a few years, and with the intention of getting them back into a mainstream class at some point where they were a bit more skilled as a swimmer to do that. Now that program's been going on for close to 40 years, and we also, I think 25 to 30 years ago, created a aquatic therapy program for children living with autism. And what that was utilising the therapy that a lot of children with autism receive on land, but applying it in a water-based context. So, utilising occupational therapists, physios, speech pathologists, etc., to deliver some outcomes for their client, but in water instead of on land. Because what we found is there's a lot of kids with sensory disability that water is a different medium for them, and some it's a relaxing medium. So there's some kids that are floating on their back in the water. They've been able to desensitize and then be able to talk for the first time in their lives. And for other kids, it's completely different, where the sensation of water is so overpowering that they can't have baths and showers at home. And so, that is really hard on parents. So through the aquatic therapy program, a number of kids have been able to learn how to desensitize to the feeling of water on their body and eventually enjoy swimming and make life at home a little bit easier. So that's the 2 elements of that program. We've currently got 220 people in that program a week up until March 18th this year, when the government, with the COVID-19 crisis, were shutting all the pools across the country. So unfortunately, that took a massive toll on our organisation. So I had to put 30 casual staff on standby and 220 families a week without a program to go to for the first time. As it was, that took a massive financial hit for us. We lost 50% of revenue in March, and we're predicting a 90% deficit on revenue for April, which was pretty brutal. But at this stage, with some of the other government interventions, we haven't really had to lay off any staff, and a lot of the casuals will be able to come back on through JobKeeper program in the coming weeks as well, which would be fantastic. But yeah, it's taken a massive hit to our organisation, and one that will probably take a decade to recover from.
Yeah, obviously it's really unfortunate what's happened in the world with COVID-19, and it's having effect on obviously a lot of sporting organisations, particularly I suppose the winter sports. I suppose are suffering a bit more of a hit, and obviously the closure of indoor sporting facilities has been, I suppose, quite unfortunate. But obviously with your swimming program, our casual court hire at Badminton SA, it's obviously, we want people to keep active during this time, but obviously we need to do whatever we can to slow the spread of the virus. So, John, can you tell us a little bit more about the C6 netball program and the C7 football competition? Obviously, the C7 football competition was rebranded under the guidance of the SANFL instead of the Amateur League or the Adelaide Footy League back in 2018.
Yeah, so both of those programs are the 2 pillars from which the organisation was built. So we were established in 1982 as a business by Mari Little OAM. However, probably 3 to 4 years prior to that, she'd started a netball competition. And the netball competition was for young women with intellectual disability to participate in club netball. And basically the C6 division is what that has become over that time. So C6 is one of the lower divisions within the Metropolitan Netball League, Adelaide Metropolitan Netball Division, AMND. So if you ever go to Etzer Park or whatever it's called, Priceline Stadium now, down at Mile End on a Saturday afternoon, you'll see the thousands upon thousands of people down there playing netball. So on one of the courts, somewhere in that mass crowd would be the C6 netball competition, which is young women living with integration difficulties, so intellectual disability and other disabilities, and they basically play club netball. They play for Contacts, Matrix, Woods, Semaphore, and teams like that. Play to the same standard of rules. There's just, I guess, a bit more understanding to the abilities of some of the women by the people that support them through coaching and umpiring and other bits and pieces. But essentially, it's provided a lot of young women and older women. I think there's some ladies there in their 60s still playing that started back in the day in the first season. So shout out to Vesna and Heather, I think, who are still playing. So yeah, those programs started off as a way to get people into mainstream sporting clubs and communities. So they may just choose to play netball, and that's the netball program best to their ability. But what they do is they meet other people, they meet their coaches, they meet the people within the club. For football, more so than netball, they might go back to the club for meals, and they go to the club on weekends and watch the other divisions play. And it builds that same community culture that sport has been able to build for all of us growing up. You know, if you were local to the Henley Footy Club, I'm sure you were down there every other day just hanging out and saying g'day to people. So it's no different for people living with disability. And C6 and C7 divisions in footy and netball have been able to create that over a long period of time. But through the intention of our organisation was very much to embed those into the mainstream structure of sport. So the SNFL taking over that program in 2018 meant that we no longer had an active day-to-day role in it, which was fantastic. So we were able to transition that over. Netball SA towards the end of 2019 were able to take control of the entire C6 division, and if it had gone ahead so far this year, they would have been managing that from the start of the season through to the end without sort of major support from us, which would have been brilliant as well. So that's really then changed the direction of our organisation and what we will be doing next, which is still a work in progress. But yeah.
Yeah, obviously the C7 competition had been around for, what was it? It's definitely over 25.
Yeah, 1992, I think they played their first game at a state game or something like that. So it's been a while, yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, as we said earlier in the show, the plan is for all the state sporting organisations to have a person, dedicated to disability sport. I know Badminton SA, myself and Jack Crispin look after para badminton, and we'd obviously hope to launch a intellectual disability program in a obviously post COVID-19 world.
Yeah.
John, we've seen in the past few years the NDIS disability insurance scheme come in. How has that assisted you at Inclusive Sport SA so far?
In terms of our rapid swim and aquatic therapy program, it's been able to sustain that. So we charge the swimmers in those programs through the NDIS, which is majority of our revenue. In terms of inclusion and sport, the NDIS has actually, to some extent, been a hindrance. So the NDIS is basically where instead of giving a grant to a state sporting body to run sport, they would give it to all the participants of the sport at a smaller amount. And then the state sporting body would have to go out and engage those people individually to come and play their sport. So the NDIS does not actually consider that the work we do in advocacy in sport as an individualized program. So that we weren't actually able to charge an individual rate to any of the people that we supported through sport, hence the need to transition all of those programs over to the SNFL and Netball SA. What has happened though is they've had significant grant programs in that time. So we were able to pick up an NDIS grant, I think in 2017 or 2018, for about $500,000 over 2 years, and that's a information linkages and capacity building grant. So yeah, it would have been July 2018 that started for us, and that'll finish in the end of June this year. But significant amount of money, and we were able to build a 3-pillar project from that. So the first part of that was building a hub on our website where we will be able to engage all of the best knowledge that we can around inclusion and how sports can utilise that. A bit of a forum for people to share thoughts and ideas. The other one was to do a mass social media campaign around encouraging mainstream sport to engage people with disability and normalise it. So that was our Well Play campaign, if you saw any of that on Facebook and Instagram, social media, which was very successful. I think Katrina was telling me it hit 1.3 million people over about 6 months, which was awesome. And then the last part of that, which we'll be releasing in the next few weeks, hopefully, was I think we've got 10 videos where people with a disability were able to develop their own content around what they need to be supported to play sport, what the benefits have been for them to play sport, where the barriers have been and how they were able to overcome them, etc. And that was filmed by the same person who did Well Play, but it was written and I guess delivered by people living with a disability for people living with disability, which is pretty awesome. So, but that'll come to an end soon. So the NDIS has been an interesting change for sport. At the moment, the best bet for the NDIS is going to be around sport and mainstream organisations seeking grants rather than being able to deliver individualised support and getting an income that way. But it's a very complicated program. It's worth $22 billion a year. So there's a lot behind it. But yeah, if anyone ever wants to talk more about it, they can give me a call.
Yeah, you mentioned about, I suppose, the education about how to include people with disabilities into mainstream sports. I remember one of my topics at Flinders University, which you know about, was with Dr. Sam Elliott, who we'll be having on the show later this week, about and Steph Greenland, obviously, about, I suppose, how to include people. And there are obviously a number of resources that students at Flinders University have, I suppose, produced. And are they still on your website?
Oh, look, it's a great question. I would be lying if I said I knew. I haven't been on there for a while. Last I heard, they were still on there. They are around, and I know there were a whole bunch of YouTube videos that people had on. So I'm sure you could even sort of find them scouting around YouTube for a little bit. But yeah, they were very good resources. We had a number of students in the end as well present them at one of our inclusion and diversity in sport conferences, which are really good. But yeah, what was fun working on that program, which is obviously how we met you, Callum, was we tried to get across how to include anyone really, into sport, whether they have a disability or not. And really what it comes down to is just being able to have a real honest and welcoming conversation with every individual that wants to participate, and asking them at what level and how they want to participate, and not sitting there and saying, oh, I don't think you can do that, you're better off going somewhere else. So it was about being flexible and being able to solve problems on the fly. So, you know, for people that were going to be school teachers, it was no good being able to say to a kid with a disability, oh, you're better off not coming out to this PE class. You're better off staying in the classroom with the other teacher. And, you know, that sort of an attitude is not good enough. And it was about giving them an opportunity to come up with a new idea, whether it be a new type of equipment modification, a new change to rules, whatever that might be, just to get people included in those school classes around PE.
Yeah, I definitely remember that topic being, I suppose, really important in my own development, because I was at Henley working with the C7 footballers at the time, and obviously it was something that I found, I suppose, really eye-opening, and obviously has helped. I suppose that experience at Inclusive Sport SA has really helped me to, I suppose, you know, I suppose it makes me feel, makes me realize how lucky I am to be in the position I am. And obviously, you know, you want to include as many people as possible. And a lot of people don't realize that some of these players that, for the footy, some of these players have immense talent, and obviously can go on and play for their state. I look at
Well,
the
not only that,
Goodman
mate.
brothers.
Yeah, but not only that, a lot of them are, going to uni. So one of the Goodman brothers went to university and did your degree.
Yeah, Jesse.
He started that. Yeah. We've got other guys that are parents. Most of them have a driver's license. It's quite interesting how society has pigeonholed people with intellectual disability. And once you get to know them and understand, the skills and capabilities of these people, that they really are just people, with just different ability levels in different things. So, like if you ever want a really good statistician, having Brad around was always one of the things. If you needed someone to count how many marks and tackles were going on, he could count it, all of that stuff better than I could. He'd follow a rule book better than anyone I'd ever met.
Brad Breddens.
It was really amazing seeing the talents and ability level. But I was like you, mate. I grew up around disability, and it was eye-opening for me coming into this role to realize that not everyone's had that experience. Not everyone has been able to see and understand it and normalize it. So that was really what we were trying to do through that program, and meet as many young people like you coming into the industry that would see disability as not different, but just another thing to be on top of and understand.
Yeah. John, are there any new projects that Inclusive Sport SA are working on during this time that they'd be looking to launch within the next maybe 1 to 2 years in a post-COVID-19 world, obviously?
Yeah, look, there's a heap of them. There's all sorts of things always going on, including during this pandemic. We're trying to pitch work that we think would help the industry, especially people like yourself who would love to stay connected but have been stood down or had roles terminated, etc. So, is there some training and support that we can offer them around inclusion so that when they get back into the industry, they've got a new set of skills to bring to the table? So we're working through some of that. Hopefully, we'll get some good news at some point that the government are able to support it. But look, one of the ones I'm most proud of that we were hoping to launch at this time, but obviously we've put back for now, was our state guidelines around trans and gender diverse participation in community sport. It's a fascinating new area. It's a fascinating debate that is happening in sport. At what point should sport turn around and say to someone, we will exclude you because of either your gender identity or your physiology or your biology or whatever it might be? And so it's an active debate at the moment, and one that we are trying to be involved in and trying to give people an understanding of where the barriers are and how people can get through those barriers, and just give people an experience of being involved in a community.
Yeah, obviously we saw a story in the AFLW. I think it was probably beginning of 2018. Obviously, that was not, I suppose, social media. Sometimes the way it is was quite harsh, and obviously we want to, I suppose, remove those stigmas and those stereotypes, and obviously open up sport to as many people as possible. What are, from I suppose, a sport and participation sort of standpoint, what are the plans for Inclusive Sport SA in the future? Are you looking to, I suppose, link in with as many sporting organisations as possible to provide opportunities for participation?
Yeah, 100%. So, in all honesty, and you might get the mini exclusive here, is that we have been building a new brand around how we go about that. So Inclusive Sport SA really has achieved a lot of its goals it set out to do as an organisation, at which point we've had a bit of an identity crisis. What do we do moving forward? Because we don't want to be seen as the focal point for inclusion in sport if the sports are actually taking care of that themselves. We want people to be going straight to their sporting organisation. So if someone has an interest in badminton, they should be going straight to badminton, having the discussion with them about what their needs and capabilities are, and badminton being able to deliver on that. Now, the reality is badminton may not have the resources to always have expertise on hand to do that. So we're actually transitioning the work we do more into that consultancy work where we can be available to organisations like yours, who can reach out to us and say, look, we've got this situation, we've got this information, we need extra support around that. And that's really where we're going to spend our time. And the brand that we've sort of set up to do that consulting program for us is called Active Inclusion. And Active Inclusion is about obviously making inclusion an active idea within a sport, but also sort of playing more towards a physical activity focal point rather than just saying it has to be sport and competitive sport. You know, there are multiple ways people with disability and, people with gender and identity barriers, they can also find a way, and it might just be playing, a social sport or going for walks around a local community, et cetera, et cetera. So that's where we're focusing our future and spending some time.
Yeah, John, thank you so much for your time and for joining us on Sports Isolated. Obviously, it's been a real privilege to catch up with you again and obviously talk about the world of disability sport here in South Australia.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me, Callum. I've literally got my kids just open the door and trying to come inside right now. So, you caught me at the right time. But the joys of working from home is I've got 3 kids on school holidays that think that my little caravan office is their playroom. So there you go.
Yeah, no worries, mate. For
Thanks
those of you
for
who
having me.
No worries. For those of you who are watching at home, thank you very much for tuning in. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.
Brilliant. Great initiative, mate. Good luck.